In the shadow of great battles and famous names in Soviet military history stands the figure of a man whose contribution to victory is hard to overestimate, but whose name is rarely heard in popular war narratives: Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov, the only Marshal of the Soviet Union with a full Tsarist general staff education, who retained a high post and Stalin's trust in an era when an officer's past often meant a death sentence. This paradox of his biography only emphasizes the uniqueness of a personality who became the architect of Soviet military science. Quiet, reserved, always in an immaculate uniform, with an ever-present pince-nez. This is how his contemporaries remembered him. Behind the outwardly academic dryness lay the brilliant mind of a strategist and analyst who created the theoretical foundation for the future victories of the Red Army. Stalin, who respectfully called him by his first name and patronymic, valued Shaposhnikov for what others considered a shortcoming, for his ability to think independently, relying on deep knowledge and experience rather than on political opportunism. His fate, like a mirror, reflected the dramatic history of a country that transitioned from an empire to a new state, while maintaining the continuity of military thought. Boris Shaposhnikov received his military education at the Moscow Military School, from which he graduated in 1901. The young lieutenant began his service in the Turkestan military district, where he encountered the realities of army life far from the glitter of the capital. It was here, in the harsh conditions of the Central Asian frontier, that his ability for analytical thinking and detailed planning was formed. Colleagues noted his unusual, for a young officer, inclination towards the theoretical comprehension of military affairs. Shaposhnikov did not merely execute orders. He sought to understand the logic of military decisions, studied the history of campaigns and battles. In 1910, Boris Mikhailovich took a decisive step in his career. He entered the Imperial Military Academy. This educational institution, which trained general staff officers, was the focal point of military thought in the Russian Empire. The best minds of Russian military science taught here, including Professors Golovin, Niznamov, Mikhnevich, men who laid the theoretical foundation of Russian military doctrine. The academy provided Shaposhnikov not only deep knowledge, but also a special methodological approach to military problems. He assimilated the principles of systemic analysis, learned to see the interrelationship between politics, economics, and military strategy. The First World War became for Shaposhnikov a true school of combat experience. Starting the war as a lieutenant colonel, he quickly proved himself to be a talented staff officer. He was distinguished by exceptional diligence, attention to detail, and the ability to foresee the development of situations. By October 1917, Shaposhnikov had risen to the rank of colonel and held the position of chief of staff of a division. The revolutionary events found him on the Western Front. Unlike many general staff officers, Shaposhnikov did not emigrate and did not join the White Movement. His choice was dictated not so much by political convictions as by a deep understanding of historical processes and the professional duty of a military specialist. The February Revolution of 1917 presented every officer of the Russian army with a choice: personal, professional, moral. For Colonel Shaposhnikov, this choice was not simple, but it proved pivotal for his entire subsequent fate. Unlike the vast majority of general staff officers, Boris Mikhailovich decided to serve the new government. When the Bolsheviks seized power in October, the army began to rapidly disintegrate. Thousands of officers left their units, heading to the Don, to Siberia, abroad. Shaposhnikov stayed. His decision was not dictated by political sympathies for the Bolsheviks, by his views, he remained a non-partisan professional, far removed from revolutionary ideology. His understanding of state interests and his professional duty as a military man played a key role. In his few memoirs, Shaposhnikov sparingly spoke about the motives for this choice. "I believed that a military specialist should serve his people regardless of the political system." Hidden behind this simple formulation was a deep understanding of historical processes and astonishing foresight. He saw the revolution not as a temporary upheaval, but as a fundamental turning point in the country's destiny. Shaposhnikov took his first steps in the Red Army in the spring of 1918, when he was appointed head of the operational department of the Supreme Military Council's staff. His professionalism and organizational skills quickly drew the attention of the leadership. In a situation where the new government experienced an acute shortage of qualified military personnel, Shaposhnikov became one of the few military specialists entrusted with the most responsible tasks. This trust had to be earned. The sword of Damocles of suspicion of counter-revolutionary sentiments constantly hung over former Tsarist officers. Many of Shaposhnikov's colleagues were arrested on false charges. However, Boris Mikhailovich managed to build a special relationship with the Bolshevik leadership based on mutual respect and recognition of professional merits. What distinguished Shaposhnikov from many other military specialists? First and foremost, his exceptional loyalty not to specific individuals, but to the cause of building a new army. He never participated in intrigues, maintaining dignity and professional integrity. At the same time, Shaposhnikov possessed the rare gift of finding common ground with the new leaders, many of whom lacked military education. In 1927, Soviet military thought received a foundational work, the significance of which is difficult to overestimate. Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov, who by then already held high positions in the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army, RKKA, published the first volume of his study, The Brain of the Army. This was followed by the second and third volumes, completing this monumental work by 1929. The title of the work was not merely a metaphor, it reflected a fundamentally new approach to understanding the role of the General Staff in modern warfare. Shaposhnikov was one of the first in world military science to formulate the concept of the General Staff as a unified analytical and planning center for the armed forces, the true brain of the army. In his view, the General Staff was to become not merely an administrative body, but an intellectual center, ensuring the continuity of strategic planning in peacetime and wartime. The revolutionary nature of Shaposhnikov's ideas becomes evident when considering the context of the era. The 1920s were a time of fierce debates about the development paths of the Red Army. Many military leaders, especially those from among former Civil War commanders, underestimated the importance of staff work, contrasting it with revolutionary fervor and tactical improvisation. Shaposhnikov, however, insisted on a scientific approach to military affairs, on the necessity of meticulous planning and coordination of all elements of the armed forces. In his work, he thoroughly analyzed the experience of the First World War, showing how shortcomings in the work of the General Staff of the Russian Empire led to catastrophic consequences. Particularly valuable was his analysis of the German General Staff, which Shaposhnikov considered exemplary in terms of organizational work, though he also criticized it for strategic miscalculations. Boris Mikhailovich paid special attention to the interaction between military and political leadership. He wrote, "This formula proved prophetic. It was precisely this approach that allowed Soviet military planning to withstand critical moments of the Great Patriotic War." The practical impact of Shaposhnikov's work on the organization of Soviet military planning was enormous. Many of his ideas were implemented in the creation of the RKKA's Strategic Command and Control System. He laid the foundations for the methodology of staff work at all levels, created a school of staff culture that combined the best traditions of the Russian pre-revolutionary general staff with the demands of the new era. The uniqueness of Shaposhnikov's approach lay in his ability to organically combine classical principles of military science with a Marxist understanding of war as a continuation of politics. At the same time, he avoided vulgar idealization, maintaining the scientific rigor of his analysis. The 1930s were a period of deep contradictions for the Soviet Union. Industrialization and military development were accompanied by political repressions, which reached their peak in the second half of the decade. For Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov, this time proved to be a test not only of his professional, but also his personal qualities. In 1937, he was appointed Chief of the General Staff of the Red Army, at a time when the Army was experiencing a severe personnel crisis due to mass arrests of commanding officers. Marshal Tukhachevsky, Army commanders Yakir, Yuborevich, Kork, and many other military leaders were declared enemies of the people and executed. The wave of repressions literally decapitated the army on the eve of the impending World War. In this atmosphere of widespread fear and suspicion, Shaposhnikov managed to preserve not only his life, but also his professional dignity. His position was unique. A former colonel of the Tsarist army, a non-party intellectual in pince-nez, heading the country's main military body. The secret of Shaposhnikov's survival lay not in political maneuvering or denunciations of colleagues, but in his exceptional professionalism and special relationship with Stalin. The leader valued in him qualities rare for that time: intellectual honesty, absence of career ambitions, and complete dedication to the task. Stalin, according to contemporaries, always addressed Shaposhnikov by his given name and patronymic, a privilege accorded to only a few. At the same time, Boris Mikhailovich never tried to use this favor for personal gain. His stance during the years of repression was extremely cautious, but not unprincipled. He did not deliver accusatory speeches against enemies of the people, nor did he participate in the persecution of his colleagues. When possible, Shaposhnikov tried to defend officers from unsubstantiated accusations. There are known cases where his personal guarantee saved people from arrest. The main work of Shaposhnikov's life during this period was to preserve the continuity of military thought. In conditions where entire scientific schools and directions were declared sabotage, he managed to save key elements of military theory developed in the 1920s. Under his leadership, the General Staff continued to work on strategic plans that took into account real threats, not ideological directives. Shaposhnikov paid special attention to the training of new personnel capable of replacing the repressed commanders. He personally supervised military academies and selected promising officers for work in the General Staff. Many future commanders of the Great Patriotic War passed through his school precisely during these difficult years. The period from 1939 to 1941 was decisive for the fate of the Soviet Union. Europe was already ablaze in the fires of World War II, and the shadow of the German war machine was inexorably approaching Soviet borders. During this critical time, Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov led the work on strategic planning for the country's defense. His experience, analytical mind, and strategic foresight proved invaluable, although many of his warnings were not fully heeded. After the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in August 1939, Shaposhnikov, unlike many political figures, harbored no illusions about the longevity of the Soviet-German rapprochement. In a narrow circle, he stated, Under his leadership, the General Staff developed a plan for the strategic deployment of the armed forces in case of war with Germany. This document, known as, was presented to Stalin in September 1940. Shaposhnikov's plan was characterized by sober realism and envisioned an initially defensive strategy with a gradual transition to a counteroffensive. He accurately identified the directions of the enemy's main strikes and proposed concentrating the main forces deep within the territory, avoiding the risk of their encirclement in border battles. However, in May 1941, when Shaposhnikov no longer held the post of Chief of the General Staff, his plan was revised by the new leadership in the person of Zhukov and People's Commissar of Defense Timoshenko. The new version envisioned more active offensive operations and the concentration of forces closer to the border. The resulting conflict of concepts had tragic consequences. Shaposhnikov, despite his deteriorating health, tried to defend his position. At meetings of the top military leadership, he persistently warned of the danger of underestimating the enemy and the risks of moving main forces to the border. His arguments were based on a deep analysis of the experience of the first campaigns of World War II, especially the catastrophe of the French army in 1940. In the spring of 1941, when intelligence reported the concentration of German troops near Soviet borders, Shaposhnikov was one of the few military leaders who took this threat with full seriousness. He sent several analytical notes to Stalin, in which he warned of the inevitability of a German invasion in the coming months. Unfortunately, these warnings did not lead to a radical revision of defensive plans. June 22, 1941, became a day of national catastrophe for the Soviet Union. German troops, having invaded Soviet territory, rapidly advanced deep into the country. In these tragic days, the country's leadership decided to return Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov to the post of Chief of the General Staff. On July 30th, when the situation on the fronts was critical, he replaced Marshal Zhukov in this position. Shaposhnikov's return at a critical moment was a recognition of his unique qualities as a military strategist. Despite his failing health, he suffered from severe hypertension and heart problems. Boris Mikhailovich worked 18 to 20 hours a day. His office in the General Staff building on Frunze Street became the true nerve center of the country's defense. It was here, under his leadership, that plans for the evacuation of industry, the regrouping of troops, and the creation of new reserves were developed. Shaposhnikov paid particular attention to the defense of Moscow. In September, when German forces were preparing Operation Typhoon, he insisted on the creation of several defensive lines around the capital and the formation of strategic reserves in the Moscow region. At his initiative, new armies were created, secretly concentrated in the rear of the Moscow direction. These forces played a decisive role in the December counteroffensive. Shaposhnikov's working methods during these critical months demonstrated his unique leadership style. He never raised his voice, never staged dressing downs, but he knew how to achieve strict compliance with his orders. Stalin valued his ability to maintain composure in the most difficult situations, and to present clear, substantiated proposals. Unlike many military commanders, Shaposhnikov was not afraid to report unpleasant truths about the situation on the fronts to the leader. One of Shaposhnikov's main achievements during this period was the restructuring of the troop command system. In conditions where communications were often interrupted and entire armies were encircled, new approaches to coordinating front actions were required. Boris Mikhailovich created the institution of Stavka representatives, experienced military commanders sent to critical sectors of the front with broad powers. This allowed for the maintenance of troop control in the most difficult situations. Under Shaposhnikov's leadership, the plan for the counteroffensive near Moscow the first major offensive operation of Soviet troops in the war, was developed. Documents testify to his active participation in planning strikes on the flanks of the German grouping. The Marshal insisted on thorough preparation of the operation, accumulation of necessary reserves, and selection of the optimal moment for going on the counteroffensive. At the High Command headquarters, Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov proved himself a true architect of victory. His office, located deep within the building on Kirova Street, became a genuine laboratory of military thought. Here, bent over enormous maps, was a man whose calm and methodical approach inspired confidence even during the most difficult days of the war. Shaposhnikov created a unique system for the work of the Stavka, based on a scientific approach to operations planning. Every decision was made only after a thorough analysis of all factors: the state of the troops, terrain, weather conditions, and logistical capabilities. The Marshal did not tolerate improvisations and rash ventures, which were so characteristic of the initial period of the war. His method involved a meticulous calculation of each step, the creation of several courses of action, and the selection of the optimal solution. At the same time, he never forgot the human factor. He protected people, demanding that the capabilities of the troops and their morale be taken into account. A distinctive feature of Shaposhnikov's style was his ability to think strategically, to see the war as a whole rather than just individual battles. He was the first to begin developing the concept of coordinated strikes by several fronts, which allowed for achieving decisive superiority in the main directions. Under his leadership, staff officers studied the experience of the first months of the war, analyzing the causes of defeats and successes. This work formed the basis of a new planning system, which subsequently led to victories at Stalingrad and Kursk. Shaposhnikov made a decisive contribution to the development of the theory of deep operation, a concept born in the 1930s but enriched by the bitter experience of the first year of the war. He insisted on the need to create powerful mobile formations capable of developing tactical success into operational success. On his initiative, tank armies were formed, the instrument of future decisive victories. In working with front commanders, Shaposhnikov showed surprising tact and respect for their experience. He never imposed ready-made solutions, but helped find the optimal course of action. Zhukov recalled, "This leadership style created an atmosphere of creative inquiry, so necessary for the development of military art." Shaposhnikov's authority among military leaders was indisputable. Even those who had professional disagreements with him valued his opinion. Rokossovsky noted, "When Shaposhnikov spoke, everyone listened with special attention. Behind his words stood enormous knowledge and experience." It was this authority that allowed the Marshal to act as an intermediary between Stalin and the front commanders, smoothing out conflicts and channeling everyone's energy into a constructive direction. Among the outstanding military leaders of the Great Patriotic War, Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov holds a special place as a teacher and mentor. His influence on the formation of the Soviet military elite is hard to overestimate. A whole generation of military commanders passed through his school of strategic thinking, assimilating not only theoretical knowledge, but also a particular style of work and methodology for analyzing military problems. A distinctive feature of Shaposhnikov's pedagogical talent was his ability to unlock the potential of every officer he worked with. He never imposed ready-made solutions, but created conditions for independent thought. Georgy Zhukov recalled, "At the Academy of the General Staff, where Shaposhnikov lectured in the 1930s, he created a unique teaching methodology based on solving practical problems. Instead of abstract theories, students were presented with specific combat situations requiring unconventional solutions. Many of these training tasks later proved prophetic. Officers had to solve similar problems in real combat conditions. Shaposhnikov attached immense importance to the intellectual development of commanders. On his initiative, the curriculum included courses on the history of military art, economics, and international relations. He believed that a modern military leader must possess a broad outlook and understand the political and economic context of military operations. Each of them inherited a part of their teacher's intellectual style. Alexander Vasilevsky, who later became chief of the General Staff, adopted particularly much from Shaposhnikov. His meticulousness, attention to detail, and ability to see the war as a whole. All these were the result of Boris Mikhailovich's influence. During the Great Patriotic War, the connection between teacher and students manifested itself in concrete strategic decisions. Many operations developed by Vasilevsky, Vatutin, Meretskov bore the imprint of Shaposhnikov's methodology. This was particularly evident in the planning of the counteroffensive at Stalingrad, where the principle of concentrating forces on narrow sectors of the front to achieve decisive superiority was applied, a principle that Shaposhnikov had advocated in his pre-war theoretical works. Shaposhnikov created a special intellectual atmosphere in the General Staff, which can be called a scientific school of strategic planning. This school valued analytical abilities, the skill of working with information, and the ability to foresee the development of events. Officers who passed through this school were distinguished by a particular style of thinking, systemic, methodical, and based on a deep analysis of all factors. By the beginning of 1943, Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov's health sharply deteriorated. Years of hypertension, exacerbated by the colossal strain of the first years of the war, took their toll. In February, the Marshal was forced to leave the post of Chief of the General Staff, handing over affairs to his student, Alexander Vasilevsky. However, Stalin did not allow Shaposhnikov to completely withdraw from affairs. His strategic mind and experience were too valuable. The Marshal was appointed a member of the Stavka of the Supreme High Command and continued to work as a key military advisor to the leader. Despite physical weakness, Shaposhnikov's intellectual abilities remained as sharp as ever. In his mansion on Granovsky Street, he daily received reports on the situation at the fronts, studied maps, and analyzed intelligence reports. Military leaders heading to the front often visited him to seek advice and hear the opinion of the wise strategist. Stalin regularly requested his assessments on key strategic issues. Shaposhnikov's recommendations for planning the Battle of Kursk proved particularly valuable. It was he who insisted on a waiting strategy, which allowed the German strike groups to be exhausted in defensive battles, and then to deliver a crushing counterattack. This approach fully justified itself, ensuring a fundamental turning point in the war. In the last months of his life, the Marshal focused on generalizing the experience of the war. He understood the historical value of what was happening and sought to record the lessons that were to become the basis of post-war military science. Shaposhnikov began work on a fundamental treatise on strategic leadership of the war, but did not live to complete it. The illness progressed, and on March 26, 1945, 6 weeks before victory, Boris Mikhailovich passed away. The country bid farewell to him as a national hero. The urn with the Marshal's ashes was buried in the Kremlin wall, the highest posthumous honor in the Soviet Union. In the official obituary, Shaposhnikov was called an outstanding military figure, a major military theorist, the creator of the Soviet School of Operational Art. Stalin, learning of the Marshal's death, uttered an unusually emotional phrase. The first assessments of Shaposhnikov's contribution began to appear during his lifetime. Zhukov wrote in his memoirs, "Boris Mikhailovich possessed a rare gift of strategic foresight." Many of his predictions, which at the time seemed too cautious, were later fully confirmed. Vasilevsky noted, "Shaposhnikov's school became the foundation of Soviet military art. Without his methodology, many of our victories would have been impossible." The Marshal's legacy proved to be long-lasting. His concept of the general staff as the brain of the army, his methodology of strategic planning, his principles of interaction between political and military leadership. All this entered the golden fund not only of Soviet, but also of world military science. In the history of every state, there are figures whose contribution to the nation's destiny is impossible to overstate, yet whose names are rarely heard in the public sphere. Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov became precisely such an quote of Soviet military history. His name didn't thunder in newspaper headlines, his portraits didn't adorn squares, no songs were composed about him. And yet, without him, the history of the Great Patriotic War could have taken a completely different path. The phenomenon of Shaposhnikov's relative invisibility in mass historical consciousness is all the more surprising, given that his real influence on the course of military events was colossal. What caused such a paradox? First and foremost, the Marshal's own personality. Modest, reserved, shunning publicity, he always remained in the shadows. Unlike vivid, charismatic commanders like Zhukov or Rokossovsky, Shaposhnikov did not possess the qualities of a national hero. His weapons were not spectacular orders and resounding victories, but quiet, methodical work in the general staff offices. Official Soviet historiography also played its part in shaping Shaposhnikov's image. In the post-war years, when the official pantheon of war heroes was being created, the figure of a former Tsarist officer, an intellectual in pince-nez, did not fit into ideological canons. It was far more convenient to glorify commanders with proletarian roots or a party past. Political factors in the formation of historical memory led to Shaposhnikov's contribution being largely overshadowed. His name was mentioned in textbooks and monographs, but without the emotional intensity that accompanied stories about other military leaders. In the memoirs of Soviet commanders, Shaposhnikov appears as a respected, authoritative military specialist. But these recollections rarely reached the broad reader. Zhukov, Vasilevsky, Rokossovsky, all of them wrote with deep reverence about Boris Mikhailovich, emphasizing his intellectual influence on their own development as military leaders. The methodology of Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov as a military thinker represents a unique intellectual phenomenon, combining the best traditions of classical military science with innovative approaches of the 20th century. By analyzing his working documents, notes, and writings, we can reconstruct a special style of thinking that allowed him to become a true architect of Soviet military strategy. At the core of Shaposhnikov's method lay an exceptional systematic approach to thinking. He never viewed military problems in isolation, but always saw them within the broad context of political, economic, and social factors. His personal notes, preserved in archives, often contain diagrams and charts reflecting complex interconnections between various aspects of military affairs. Particularly indicative are his analytical calculations for assessing the enemy's potential, which considered not only purely military parameters, but also the state of industry, transport infrastructure, and the morale of the population. A distinctive feature of the Marshal's intellectual style was his rare attention to detail, while maintaining a strategic vision of the whole. Contemporaries recalled that he could spend hours working on individual elements of an operation plan, meticulously verifying every detail, but never lost sight of the overall picture. In his working notebooks, one can find surprising examples of this approach. From meticulous calculations of ammunition requirements for a specific division, to global assessments of the balance of forces across the entire theater of war. Shaposhnikov's predictive gift, his ability to foresee the development of a situation, was based not on intuition, but on rigorous scientific analysis. He developed his own methodology for strategic forecasting based on identifying key trends and patterns. His archive contains documents demonstrating the astonishing accuracy of his pre-war predictions regarding the nature of the future conflict with Germany. As early as 1938, he predicted the Blitzkrieg strategy, the massive use of tank formations, and the importance of fighting for air superiority. A unique feature of Shaposhnikov's method was the organic integration of theory and practice. Unlike many theorists who created abstract concepts detached from reality, he always tested his ideas against practical feasibility. His notes often contain remarks such as, "Check feasibility under conditions. Clarify taking into account the real state." This pragmatic approach allowed him to avoid dangerous illusions, so characteristic of military planning. The legacy of Boris Shaposhnikov extends far beyond Soviet military history, occupying a special place in the global military science of the 20th century. Today, with the distance of time, we can reevaluate the scale of his theoretical developments and their impact on the evolution of strategic thinking in many countries around the world. Surprisingly, for a long time, his works remained insufficiently studied in the West, partly due to the language barrier, partly due to ideological prejudices of the Cold War. Only in recent decades have military theorists from various countries begun to realize the true significance of the concepts developed by Shaposhnikov. When comparing the ideas of the Soviet Marshal with the works of leading Western military thinkers, Little Hart, Fuller, Guderian, a striking consonance in understanding the nature of modern warfare is revealed. However, Shaposhnikov in many ways outpaced his Western colleagues, especially in comprehending the role of the General Staff as a unified coordinating center for the armed forces. His concept of the brain of the army anticipated modern ideas about network-centric troop control, which became the foundation of 21st-century military doctrines. Shaposhnikov's developments in the field of strategic planning proved particularly relevant. His methodology for analyzing potential theaters of war, assessing the balance of forces, and predicting enemy actions is currently used by military planners in many countries worldwide. Interestingly, after the end of the Cold War, American military analysts discovered striking parallels between Shaposhnikov's approaches and modern operational research methods employed by the Pentagon. The influence of the Soviet Marshal's ideas on the development of modern approaches to managing large-scale military operations can be traced even in those countries where his name is rarely mentioned in official doctrines. The principles of echeloning command posts, organizing interaction between different branches of the armed forces, and creating a flexible system of reserves. All these elements of modern military planning bear the imprint of Shaposhnikov's methodology. Western researchers who studied the Soviet experience of the Great Patriotic War note Shaposhnikov's unique ability to combine strategic vision with attention to tactical details. American military historian David Glantz wrote, "Shaposhnikov's contribution to the development of the theory of interaction between political and military leadership in modern warfare deserves special attention. His concept of the General Staff as a link between the political will of the state and the military power of the country is today recognized as one of the most important achievements of 20th century military thought. This idea is reflected in the structure of military planning in most modern states, where close coordination is ensured between political objectives and the military means of achieving them. Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov stands apart in the gallery of Soviet military leaders, a man whose fate united two eras, two worldviews, two military traditions. His life path represents an astonishing philosophical paradox. An officer of the Imperial Army who became the architect of the Soviet Union's military might, a custodian of classical military traditions who created a fundamentally new system of strategic planning. How did this man manage to maintain professional integrity and fidelity to his principles in an era when the very ground was slipping from underfoot, when old values were collapsing and new ones were only just forming? This question contains the deep existential enigma of Shaposhnikov's personality. Outwardly reserved, even pedantic, he possessed an inner core that was not broken by revolutionary storms or political repressions. His colleagues recalled a remarkable trait of the Marshal's character: the ability to remain himself in all circumstances. Vasilevsky wrote, "The secret of this inner stability lay in Shaposhnikov's particular worldview. He viewed military affairs not as a political instrument, but as a science with its own laws and principles. His fundamental values, professionalism, intellectual honesty, service to the fatherland, proved to be timeless, independent of the political system. This allowed him to become a true link between the military traditions of Tsarist Russia and the Soviet Union." The legacy of Boris Mikhailovich Shaposhnikov for modern Russia is difficult to overestimate. In an era of new geopolitical challenges and the transformation of military science, his ideas acquire particular relevance. The Marshal created not just theoretical constructs. He formed a holistic philosophy of military planning that transcends the boundaries of time and ideologies. In the modern world, where the nature of conflicts is rapidly changing, Shaposhnikov's methodology offers universal tools for strategic analysis. His concept of the general staff as the, quote, "an intellectual center capable of integrating all aspects of the country's defense," resonates with modern ideas about comprehensive state security. Of particular value is Shaposhnikov's developed approach to assessing potential threats. In a multipolar world, hybrid warfare and the blurring of boundaries between military and non-military methods of confrontation, his system for analyzing the strategic situation remains an unsurpassed example of military analytical thought. The continuity of military science is one of the key ideas that the Marshal championed throughout his activity. Today, this idea takes on special significance. Shaposhnikov showed that true progress in military affairs is possible only by preserving and creatively developing accumulated experience. He managed to combine the classical heritage of the Russian military school with the revolutionary concepts of the 20th century, creating a synthesis that still retains its vitality. Modern Russian military theorists are increasingly turning to Shaposhnikov's works, finding in them answers to pressing questions of defense organization in the context of a technological revolution. His ideas about the interaction of different branches of troops anticipated the modern concept of joint operations. His views on the role of information in military confrontation are surprisingly consonant with the theories of information warfare of the 21st century. In Russia's military academies today, not only Shaposhnikov's specific theoretical provisions are studied, but also his intellectual method, the ability to systematically analyze complex problems, see the interconnections between various factors, and predict the development of a situation based on a deep analysis of trends. Shaposhnikov created a school of military thought that continues to live on in the works of his followers. Many principles of modern Russian military planning bear the imprint of his ideas. This applies to the structure of the general staff, the methodology for developing military doctrine, and approaches to strategic deterrence. The most important lesson that Marshal Shaposhnikov left us is the understanding of the indissoluble link between military theory and practice. In an era when technology is changing at dizzying speed, his approach to integrating new means of armed struggle into a holistic system of military art remains a model for modern military thinkers.